It started with a simple rule: don't open any door unless you're told. By the end of the flight, I'd broken that rule, and I wish I hadn't. I had been a maid for 5 years, working on luxury yachts and jets, but this job felt different from the start. It wasn't just the exclusivity of working on a private jet for one of the most famous men on the planet. It was the vibe. Everything about this flight felt off. The jet was immaculate, with plush leather seats, golden fixtures, and a champagne bar that seemed unspoken tension in the air. The other staff, the flight attendants, the security team, even the chef, moved quickly and spoke in whispers. They avoided eye contact with me. My instructions were simple: clean, serve, and keep out of the way. Diddy himself was friendly enough when he boarded, surrounded by an entourage of 4 men dressed sharply in black suits. But his friendliness felt rehearsed, a mask he wore for the world. "Whatever you do," one of the attendants warned me before takeoff, "don't open any door unless you're explicitly told to. Understand?" Her eyes were serious, almost pleading. I nodded, brushing it off as a rule to maintain privacy. But deep down, the way she said it made my stomach twist. The flight began smoothly, with champagne flowing and soft music playing in the background. The entourage laughed loudly, discussing business deals and upcoming projects. I stayed in the background, wiping down surfaces and restocking drinks. About an hour into the flight, I noticed one of the men in the entourage walk toward the back of the jet. He carried a small black briefcase, his expression blank. He disappeared into a door at the rear of the cabin, the same door I'd been told never to open. Curiosity prickled at me, but I stayed in my lane. The attendant's warning echoed in my mind. 30 minutes later, the man returned, his face pale and glistening with sweat. He avoided everyone's gaze and sat back down. No one acknowledged him, as if this was normal. That's when I started to notice other oddities. Diddy's security team was unusually strict, even for a celebrity. They constantly scanned the cabin, whispering into earpieces. They weren't protecting him. They were watching us. Then came the food service. The chef prepared an elaborate meal, but when I brought the tray to the entourage, one of the security guards stopped me. "Not that plate," he said, swapping it for another identical tray. "Wait," I asked before I could stop myself. He stared at me coldly. "You don't ask questions here." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Something wasn't right. The laughter from the entourage now sounded hollow, their smiles forced. And then it happened. The jet hit turbulence, a sharp jolt that made everyone grip their seats. Plates rattled, and one of the entourage members spilled his drink. As I bent down to clean it, I heard something, sound, low and muffled, coming from the back of the jet. It wasn't the hum of the engines or the creak of the cabin. It was a voice. I froze, my heart pounding. No one else seemed to notice. The laughter continued, the entourage oblivious. When I straightened up, the same man with the briefcase was heading toward the back again. This time, I followed at a distance, pretending to tidy up. He opened the door and slipped inside. It was barely ajar, but I caught a glimpse of something in arms. Not his, but someone else's. I stumbled back, bumping into a seat. One of the security guards snapped his head toward me, his eyes narrowing. "Everything okay?" Yes, yeah," I stammered, quickly returning to the galley. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of tension. The laughter, the strange movements, the muffled sounds from the back, they all blended into a nightmare. By the time we landed, I was desperate to get off the jet, but as I reached for my bag, one of the security guards blocked my path. "You're staying," he said firmly. "What?" "Debrief." The word sent a chill down my spine. I followed him to the galley, where the attendant who'd warned me earlier was waiting. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "You didn't open any doors, did you?" she asked quietly. "No," I lied, my voice shaky. She exhaled, relief washing over her face. "Good. Just don't talk about anything you saw, for your own sake." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that everyone knew something I didn't. The conversation in the galley was hushed, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. The woman who had warned me earlier gave me a stern look, but it didn't feel like concern. It felt like fear. "Just listen to me," she said quietly, as if ensuring no one else would hear. "You don't know what you've stepped into. You have no idea." Before I could respond, one of the security guards walked into the galley, his gaze cold and unblinking. "You're done for the day," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Go to your quarters." I didn't argue. I couldn't. The tension had become suffocating, like being trapped in a box with no way out. I returned to my small quarters at the back of the jet, my mind racing. What had I seen? What had I heard? I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sounds from earlier echoed in my mind. The muffled voice, the strange figure behind the door. I couldn't make sense of it. Every minute felt like an eternity. And then, hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. I leapt from the bed, heart racing. It was as though the whole plane had trembled. I rushed to the door, but before I could open it, I hand-gripped the handle from the other side. My breath caught in my throat. The door creaked open slowly, revealing one of the security guards. His eyes were empty, distant. He didn't speak, but his gaze said everything. I was to stay quiet, stay hidden, and above all, stay out of sight. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and he shut the door without a word. It wasn't until the plane landed that I felt a small sense of relief, but I knew deep down that I wasn't safe. Not yet. We had arrived at a private, isolated airstrip. The lights were dim, and the area was eerily quiet, with no sign of any other planes. "Stay in the cabin," a voice ordered. It was one of the security men, this time standing outside the jet, as though guarding me from something or someone else. I wanted to leave, to run, but I had no idea where to go. The whole flight, the strange events, the whispers of fear, all of it had left me with a deep sense of isolation. That's when I saw it. A van, black and unmarked, pulling up to the jet. It stopped just a few feet away, and two men in dark suits got out. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge anyone. Their eyes were trained on the jet, and their movements. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Something was wrong. I had to get off this jet, away from whatever was happening here, but I wasn't allowed to leave. The men approached the jet and exchanged a brief, unreadable look with the security guards. Then, one of them walked up to me. "You're not going anywhere yet," he said flatly. "We have to talk." My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. I didn't even know what to ask. He motioned for me to follow him, and I did, reluctantly, but without a choice. We walked toward a small building on the edge of the runway. It was old, with peeling paint and broken windows. The men didn't speak as we entered, leading me through a dim hallway into a room with a single chair in the center. "You're going to sit down," the man ordered, "and you're going to listen." I sat. I had no choice. One of the men took a seat across from me and spoke in a low, deliberate voice. "You've seen things, heard things. You have questions. But some things are better left unanswered." The way he spoke, the calm, almost rehearsed tone, it was as if he had done this 100 times before. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He leaned forward. "This is bigger than you think. Bigger than anything you can imagine. The plane, Diddy, the security, it's all part of something much darker." My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "The sacrifice," he said. "Every year, someone has to disappear. And this year, it's you." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt my blood run cold. "You're lying," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He shook his head slowly. "It's too late now. There's no way out. The flight wasn't just a party. It was the setup. And now you're a part of it." I wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. You've seen things you weren't meant to see, the man continued. And now you know too much. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. The door swung open, and 2 more men entered. They didn't look at me. They just stood silently behind the man who had spoken. I stood, my legs trembling. "What do you want from me?" The man across from me didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the door. "You'll find your way out soon enough, but I suggest you forget everything for your own safety." I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I reached the door, I heard his final words. "Run, and you'll never make it. No one will believe you, and the truth is more terrifying than you could ever understand." I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran as fast as I could, my feet pounding against the cold, cracked ground, the air sharp and cold in my lungs. I didn't look back. I finally reached the edge of the runway, where the night air felt thick, suffocating. I could hear the jet engines in the distance, and then everything went silent. And that's when I woke up. I was back on the jet, everything exactly as it had been before. The laughter, the music, the entourage. But it wasn't real. It couldn't have been. I felt my heart race again, the panic racing in my chest. It was the same flight, the same place, the same people, but something had changed, and I realized in that instant I wasn't escaping. I was trapped